We've got Ahmed with us today. I was going to try and pronounce your last name, but then I bailed.
I don't blame you. Yeah, it's Giaziri. Yeah, my ancestors, I'm from Libya originally, but my father's ancestors were from Algiers in Algeria, so it just means from Algiers.
Ah, right. That's cool. That's cool. When did your family move to the UK? And was it a couple of generations ago, or was it relatively recently?
They moved when I was 3 years old. So in 1984, my father set up a oil trading firm in the UK. So he was
Wow.
in the oil business in Libya, and yeah, very successful because he studied economics in America, and
Mm.
just because he could speak English and was good at socializing with Americans, he was the man to set up a lot of the big oil trading deals.
Mm.
What he'd set up on his own, basically buying oil in the summer when it's cheap, demand is low, and selling it in the winter when demand is up and the price goes up. But it's a simple business, but he did well out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you did well. That sounds like an interesting podcast as well. I need to talk to your dad. Yeah.
To be honest, he's the one that should be on this podcast.
No, you're too modest, man. You're too modest. So you moved from Libya in 1984. So you were 3 years old. So what's your experience been like, and where did you move in the UK? Was it down south somewhere, and have you always stayed there, or have you moved around a bit?
Yeah, it's I'm actually in the house we moved to. I'm in my parents' house
Mm.
right now in Bromley in South London. So my father's office was in London, Victoria, and there was a fast train from Bromley to London, Victoria.
Mm.
Um, but it was just from a friend's recommendation. He bought in Bromley, and this is before the internet. You can't really do research. You just go on recommendations because this house is nice, but if he bought somewhere in Richmond, he's probably going to be worth 3 times as much.
That's the way London works sometimes, isn't it?
I know.
So you grew up in London then, or in that area in South London, did you say?
Yeah, I grew up in London, had a nice, comfortable life in suburbia, wanted to do medicine, didn't get in into medicine in the UK, and it was just by chance my dad's secretary at the time, she's Irish, and she just said to me, "Why don't you apply for medicine in Ireland?" Which I did. I didn't get in, but in Ireland you can put down a second choice, which doesn't prejudice your application for medicine. So I put down dentistry as a second choice.
Well,
Got into dentistry, and still tried to reapply for medicine in second year and still didn't get in. And so just took
somebody's
the,
trying to tell you something now.
I know, I took the hint. I shouldn't be saving people's lives. I probably should be doing the opposite.
So that must have been interesting for you ending up in Ireland then.
Yeah, completely. Very, very naive, very green. Didn't really appreciate Ireland was an independent country, um, because they still had the pound or the punt back then. They spoke English, and yeah, it really opened up my eyes on what other nationalities think of us English, and how we get taught a very blinkered view of world history, and it's not until you go to a country that was occupied by the British Empire for 800 years you get another perspective.
Well, yeah, and your Libyan brethren will have something to say about that as well, won't they, nowadays?
Exactly. Actually,
Yeah.
there was so much anti-English sentiment in Ireland with a few of my Republican friends that I actually started raising my Libyan flag because the the Irish love the Libyans um, for their help with their independence movement. So yeah, I suddenly became Libyan again.
So we kind of skittered over it, though. What's it like doing a degree that you didn't really want to do originally? Like, how did that work as in terms of your mindset and approach to it?
It was very interesting if I'm honest, and I didn't really have time to really think about it. The first lecture I had at Trinity College in Dublin was how lucky we are, and I still remember that lecture because I didn't really want to be there, but they were just saying to us, you're in the top 70 in the whole country, because their dentistry is even more difficult to get into their medicine because of more limited places. I didn't even appreciate Trinity College was their version of Oxbridge, and they were just telling me how lucky I am to even get in. But I enjoyed university so much. We were a small class of 40. Dublin has 40 students, Cork has 30 students. We're such a close-knit class, and we had such fun and camaraderie that, to be honest, after a while, I didn't actually want to leave that club. And dental school, I didn't really have time to appreciate what I was actually doing. The first year, we didn't really do any dentistry, but it was just like a boot camp, and I'm sure lots of your other dentists will resonate that what I found was they were testing us at every corner, and I'm sure a lot of the teaching methods today would be considered bullying, but it wasn't uncommon for me to be belittled in front of patients. Really old school tactics. I once showed my supervisor a partial denture I made for a patient, a chrome. I was really proud of it. Patient was happy. Asked my supervisor what he felt about it. He said, yeah, it's okay. And then he threw it out the window and said, you can do better. And that was it, and just walked away. And to the point where it just became survival in dental school, that I didn't actually think about medicine. I didn't think about dentistry. I just felt all I was focused on was surviving dental school. And yeah, I got through it. Weirdly, in final year, 5th year, I started getting compliments from my supervisors, and I had to do a double take. They were praising my work, and I was speaking to my classmates, and they're like, yeah, they're being weirdly nice to me as well. And it just became apparent that they just wanted to knock the arrogance out of us, and they realized that in a year we're going to qualify. They need to rebuild some sort of confidence. And it worked. When I talked to my classmates from Dublin, there is a humility about those classmates that is not always there with other graduates from other dental schools. We don't think we're the best. We were told when we left, when we were given our degree, this is your license to learn. And it puts us in good stead, to be honest.
I mean, that sounds awesome, to be honest. It doesn't sound like a very pleasant experience for the first few years, but it sounds like you're right. I think a lot of younger dentists, when I'm hearing that, I think a lot of younger dentists probably need an education like that, because they do tend to come out quite, let's say, confident, maybe overconfident would be the way nowadays. Yeah,
no, I think you're right. There are a couple of guys who actually they've got really good skills in certain treatments, maybe composite bonding. They do a couple of Invisalign cases, and it turns out really well. But sometimes they do lack one of the basic skills, like endo, or finding an MB2 canal. And yeah, they don't need to be kind of humiliated or anything. Just say, don't, you're portraying a lot of confidence, but there's a lot of skills that you need to kind of work on, and we just need to keep praising what they're good at and just let them be honest what they struggle with. And they may say, I don't want to do any endos, and I don't want to do difficult extractions, which is fine until they decide to make the next step where they're opening up their own practice or they're setting up a squat, and you can't really afford to turn away patients, and they wish they kind of spent more time developing the other aspects of dentistry.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to ask you as well, so that license to learn thing, it sounds like you took that seriously, because I looked into you and you've definitely done some further education.
Yeah, I've done a couple of masters, one in implants, one in prosthodontics. I was going to do a master's in orthodontics, but it got too much, so I exited at a diploma stage. I'm not naturally gifted at dentistry, and I think most of us are not, if I'm honest. But I'm not one of those guys that can look at a procedure on YouTube and then just do it the next day. But there are some dentists that are just really good at picking things up. And one of my observations with my friend, we noticed a lot of the dentists whose fathers were dentists, couple of years out of university, they were just doing really advanced procedures, apicectomies that I wouldn't dream of doing. And I don't know whether they just had that safety net or just that experience mentor with them that they can just guide them. But some of my colleagues within a couple of years are doing really advanced things which I wouldn't have the confidence of doing, and I just needed that formal learning structure where someone tells me these are the papers you need to read, this is what you need to practice, and just someone to be honest with me and say, actually, that crown prep really sucks. Up your game.
So obviously, I'm burying the lead here a little bit. You own several practices. You said 8, going on 9. So how did that all start? You've got to start with 1, right? So
yeah, it's basically I qualified in 2004, and when I qualified in Dublin. Sorry, I'm going to give you a bit of a long answer here.
No, that's fine.
When I qualified in Dublin, there was a rumour that Australia was going to stop recognising our degree unless we registered with one of the Australian dental boards. So we found out the cheapest dental board in Australia was Queensland, where the annual registration was $200 a year, which was only 80 English pound at the time. So we just registered with no real plan to go to Australia. And then I worked I was exempt from VT, being an EU graduate, when I came back to London. So I worked 2 years in the NHS, not really knowing what I was doing, because I was seeing 2-3 patients a day if I'm lucky in university. My first day in a busy NHS practice in Slough, which has a high refugee and immigration population, seeing 30-40 patients a day, half of them not speaking in English, was a massive learning curve. And because I didn't do VT, I was literally on my own. And me and my friend had delusions we'll be out, partying every night with our, good income. But we were in bed at 7-8 p.m. just knackered every day, seeing 30 NHS patients a day. And it was just serendipity. 2006, the new contract came in, and because we were new graduates, we didn't have a good contract offer. and we didn't know what to do, and it was by chance our annual Queensland dental registration certificate came in the post that day as we were figuring out what to do. And we thought we should probably check out this country we're registered to work in, but and so I went to Australia in 2007 with my friend, and there is no NHS. It is purely private, and not only is it private, the fees are extortionate. I was really embarrassed to be charging over £1,000 for my pretty average root canals, and it was then I decided to really enhance my CPD and do some courses, because for the first time I really fell out of my depth. Massive imposter syndrome, and Australia charges high fees, but they expect high quality. You don't just move from NHS to private, raise your fees and call yourself a private dentist. Their mentality is, if you can't do a root canal to the quality of a specialist, then you have a duty to refer it, no ifs and buts. And so, I just had to really look in the mirror and said that I really need to do dentistry properly. Those 2 years in the NHS, I got quicker, but if I'm honest with myself, I did de-skill. But to progress the story, I loved Australia. After a couple of years, I was comfortable doing private dentistry, and even though my remuneration was about 35%, going up to 39% if I was hitting an hourly rate of over $400 an hour, because the fees were so high, my take-home was really good. And it wasn't until me and my wife were expecting our first in 2012 that people were convincing me to come back to England, and I was reluctant to come back. I didn't have any fear of the DLP or the GDC in Australia. I was spending an hour doing, a relatively simple filling and being well paid for it. But my wife was homesick. My dad, he was trying to blackmail me himself, saying, if I came back, he'd help me buy my first practice, and that's how it all started. So we came back 2013, had our first son, Ibrahim, and my dad, true to his word, put up a deposit for my first practice. So extremely lucky from that sense. And it wasn't that I wanted to buy a practice, but I was so gutted that I was leaving Australia. I'm still angry to this day. That psychologically I needed to be making the next step in my career just to tempt me back to England.
That's interesting, man. So you've had a really varied experience. So you obviously came up in South London, went to Ireland, got a completely different perspective there, got an absolute grilling, it sounds like, as well at university, which sounds like it was actually a good thing, and then made the bit. I mean, you kind of washed over that. You and your mate, it's quite brave to go to the other side of the world, some people wouldn't see it like that. They say, oh, yeah, you're going to Australia, sunshine and all this stuff. But, for the upbringing and things, that if you have a certain upbringing, it is quite a big leap of faith to make, like, of just going to another part of the world and not having any support out there, really, apart from, obviously, you had your friend. How was that experience? Did you ever second guess it, or when you guys talked, were you like, yeah, let's do it, let's go?
So I mean, I was single when I first went, and we just got a 12-month working holiday visa, so there was no real risk in that sense. We found the process really easy. We applied online, and and got our visa 24 hours later. Um, we had a third friend who joined us later, and he didn't get his visa in 24 hours because he admitted taking recreational drugs, which is something I would never do on a visa application. but yeah, honesty doesn't always pay, kids. And obviously, early noughties, we had the internet, so we could start applying for jobs. We could start the process of registering. We actually ended up in New South Wales, so we started emailing them saying what certificates did we need to bring, and we brought our certificate of good standing, our degrees, our police checks, and yeah, I mean, I didn't think about it too much, but it was so easy in the end. So when we literally landed on Friday morning in Australia, November 2007, and I had jet lag, so I couldn't sleep. So I thought I'd just go to the New South Wales Dental Board with my certificates just to start the process. And I remember it was a hot day, so I was just wearing t-shirt, shorts, flip-flops. I wouldn't dream walking into the GDC in flip-flops. But I literally just walked in with my paperwork just to start the process. And the lady just looked at me, took my paperwork, went to the back office, left me on my own for 10 minutes, and came back with a temporary registration certificate. She said, here's your temporary registration certificate. You can work straight away with this whilst we go through your paperwork. And we have a monthly meeting, and if your paperwork is all in line, you'll then get your permanent registration certificate. I was like, there's no way that would happen in England. So yeah, I literally arrived in Australia Friday. I was already registered to work. I'd already sorted out my indemnity before I came, and Australia is quite an informal country because I had a job interview in Sydney on Saturday morning, and I walked into the interview, and it was a middle-aged male dentist. He just looked at me and he said, "Oh, great, you're a bloke. When can you start?" The last dentist was a Sheila, and she ran off crying, and that was it. That's Australia for you. They're just quite easygoing people.
So you mentioned that's quite a big jump. So it's almost like going from being an NHS dentist here to like almost like a high-end private practice, and then just bang, like you have to adapt. So you mentioned that adaptation period was quite difficult, and then that kind of motivated you to do CPD. So what did you choose to do first? What did you think was going to be the highest return on investment for your day to day?
Yeah, I mean, I decided I really wanted to learn about implants. I'm not sure why I made that decision. I mean, I heard implants were very lucrative, and I did some research on some courses, and because I just arrived in Australia, I wasn't sure how I was going to settle. I decided to still use a UK university to start my master's in implantology. In that, if I ever returned to the UK, I could finish it, or I could and use those qualifications straight away. And yeah, a common theme. I don't mind trying things, and so I managed to do MSc in implantology from UCLan in Preston, but because they had a training center in Singapore at the time, I thought Singapore wasn't too far from Australia, which is just a 9-hour flight. So every second month I'd fly to Singapore, assist in placing implants, and UCLan, because they were a brand new university themselves, their dental school had just really set up. They were quite open to allowing me to do the degree in Australia, and they found me a mentor in Sydney who was an oral surgeon that did a lot of implants, and I'm still in touch with him today because he was an excellent mentor. He was meant to just teach me implants, but he basically taught me A to Z of oral surgery. And I remember the first implant I tried to do with him, I picked up the scalpel and he just goes, whoa, 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 just put that scalpel down. And I put it down and he goes, I could tell by the way you held that scalpel, you don't know what you're doing. And he goes, I'm going to bring you in during my sedation day, and we're going to just take out wisdom teeth together all day. And that's what he did. He was right. My oral surgery skills were non-existent, and yeah, he just took me down a peg or two, just taught me how to take out teeth, how to do suturing, how to raise flaps. And then when he felt I was ready, he let me place implants with him.
So it sounds like it was professionally a great experience. How was it like lifestyle wise being in Australia?
It was amazing. If I'm honest, I mean we work hard here to get the work-life balance right, where in Australia you don't really have to work at it too hard, because they've got amazing weather, amazing beaches. When you're leaving work at 5 o'clock, there's no way you'd stay late at work, doing massive treatment plans. You do it another morning. You just go to the beach, and even though cost of living it was high there, and it still is, because they've got so many things to do outdoors. Like they've got free barbecue grills at the beach that you can just do a barbecue in the evening. It's all free of charge. I remember it so distinctly. Like people would barbecue. You just press a button in it because you 10 minutes free gas, and it runs out. Then you repress it if you're still grilling. But it was noticeable how much respect people had for public facilities, because the person who's finished with it would clean that barbecue so well, ready for the next person to use, and no one would dream of leaving litter behind or anything like that. And it just kind of really stuck with me, like how well some people do treat public services. And even when I went to Singapore, I was looking at from the airport to my implant training center, there's all these kind of high-rise apartments that looked really modern, and taxi driver told me they're actually social housing. And I thought these look amazing to be social housing apartments. They look like luxury apartments to me. And they had this mentality, if you treat people like animals, they'll behave like that. But if you give them something really nice, place to live in, they might start respecting it. And it works in Singapore, works in Australia, and yeah, I just don't know if that's always the case here.
Would you ever go back? Would you ever? Because it seems like you really did enjoy it.
No, I mean, if it wasn't for my situation here, I would probably consider going back. But I'm always kind of counting my blessings, and yeah, having kids, I could see how much it brought to my parents and my wife's parents, seeing their grandkids, how it enriched their lives. And I wasn't particularly close to my parents or siblings, and just having kids actually probably brought us closer together. And yeah, I've really been successful in the UK because of certain loopholes we have in this country, and I'll be honest, I've taken advantage of some of those loopholes. I still speak to my Australian dentist friends, and they can't believe that you can technically buy NHS contracts in this country through a loophole, which the partnership loophole, where you become partner with the vendor for 6 months, and then 6 months later, that vendor mysteriously retires, and then the contract remains in your name. Legally, in most countries, any public contract has to be retendered if the original contract holder retires or gets struck off. And so I've grown up in England. I'm one of the generation that had 3 university fees paid for me, and I'm always grateful of my upbringing here, and I feel more just paying tax in this country than I would in Australia, who are a great country to live in, but I had no free healthcare, and for 2 years I had to have private health insurance, and I was taxed heavily. But I love my lifestyle, but I do feel that I've come home and I've put down my roots here, and I do miss the weather in Australia, but I do feel that in the end I've made the right decision.
Okay, so let's move on to the practice then. So 2013 was it that you bought your first practice, and was that an NHS practice?
No. So because I spent the last few years working in private dentistry, I didn't really want to go backwards. I know that sounds a bit disrespectful to NHS dentistry, but I couldn't go back to seeing 30, 40 patients a day. So it made more sense for me to get a private practice. And I have a couple of associates actually who have left my NHS practice to go to a private job, and it hasn't been as busy as they expected it to be. And I effectively bought my first private job. So I moved back to Bromley, my parents' place, and I wanted somewhere in the home counties to buy a practice. And what I was finding was the price of the building, anything in the outskirts of London, was so inhibitive that all the money would be going towards the property, which is an asset but a liability at the same time, because the property is not generating you income as such. It's really the business that's going to generate you the income. So more money was going towards the liability than the actual business. And my search radius got bigger and bigger, and I ended up finding a practice in Salisbury, which is about 80 to 100 miles from London. So still easy to get back to for the weekends, but for surgery practice, was turning over just around 900,000, and had a couple of specialists in-house. I felt I could learn from them. But yeah, I was quite lucky. My father gave me quite a sizable deposit, and that I was able to buy a practice that had already a large turnover. And the property itself was, I decided to buy the property. Just parents always say, always invest in property. And the property was in a 4-story townhouse in the centre of Salisbury. It was only 240,000, which was relatively cheap. We were just obviously coming out of the financial crash then, so things were looking up, but you could still get deals on properties.
Right, okay. So you've got this private practice, you've got specialists working there currently. Was that a case of taking over a well-oiled machine, or were there things that you had to implement to improve systems and stuff?
It wasn't a well-oiled machine. There was no practice manager. which obviously made the practice seem more profitable than it was. And it was that time when the CQC was just started inspecting practices. I think they 2012, 11, they were started inspecting practices. I was in Australia. I actually completely missed the whole CQC thing, and I came back and there's this CQC, and I thought, who are the CQC? They sound harmless, but they're not harmless, as I later found out. But there was no practice manager, so there was no systems in doing audits, things like that. It was, weirdly enough, an associate-run practice because the principal retired 2 years before he sold it. So it was already associate-led, and that was purely by chance. I wasn't looking for an associate-led practice. I was actually itching for one of the associates to leave because I was getting a bit bored in the office. But what it allowed me to do, which is what I now do for all my practices, is to see the profitability of the practice when the principal's not working there. And if that covers more than 150% of the loan repayments, which is the bank's criteria, I want the profit to be almost double the loan repayments, then I know it's a viable business. So I kind of accidentally kind of came across that, but now I value all my practices as if they were going to be associate-led, and that's something that wasn't the case. But the practice wasn't well-oiled. It was a successful practice. It was profitable, but there was no manager, but they had long-established staff, so managing the staff wasn't an issue. It just needed a leader, and I tried to do too much too soon. I wanted to modernize the practice, put in a CBCT machine, and during the building work, I decided to go to Tenerife, and when I came back from Tenerife, the CQC had come in, unannounced visit due to a complaint, and they basically shut us down for 3 weeks and wanted me to finish the renovations before seeing patients, and all my money had been put into the renovations that I didn't have any kind of working capital. That shutting down for 3-4 weeks would have been terminal for the business.
How did you manage that then?
This is the first big test of my career. My staff didn't want to tell me on holiday. Whilst I was on holiday, they had a CQC visit. I had to kind of drag it out of them. But I landed in Gatwick on Friday. Some of the CQC was trying to ring me whilst I was away. I wasn't picking up my phone because it was an unknown number. They said they want to meet me at 4 p.m. at my practice, and they were going to hand me a notice to close my practice at 4 p.m. They advised if there's any patients booked in after 4 p.m. to cancel them, because technically after 4 o'clock it'd be illegal for us to see any patients at the premises. So yeah, I drove back to Salisbury. I was ringing people driving down saying, like, can they do this? And wasn't really getting any help from the BDA. I tried to ring my solicitor who helped me buy the practice. She didn't really know what to do. Met the CQC at 4 o'clock. They were quite nice, actually. They saw how young I was. They kind of saw I was maybe a bit naive. I was close to tears. I think I even showed them how much money was left in a bank account to kind of plead them not to close me down. And yeah, they gave me the notice. They left the office at 4:15, saying that they will re-inspect me in a month's time. And 4:15, straight after they left, the NHS rang me. We've got a small NHS contract, saying we've been informed by the CQC you've been closed. We are going to write to all your NHS patients, which are just mainly kids, saying that they have to find alternative arrangements for their NHS care. We are wary that some patients may not receive our letters, so we feel it would be best to put a press release in the local paper and the local radio station. We're going to read out the press release to you. Just tell us if you're happy with it. But I was numb. I was in shock. I didn't know what was happening, and they just said this press release on my phone, over the phone, like, completely insensitive and just completely uncalled for in my point of view. But I just said, yeah, fine. Then I was on the local radio station that evening, and I rang the previous principal. I was ringing people, didn't know what to do, and he just said to me, ring Demplan, because we were a big Demplan practice. And I was like, all right, I'll call Demplan. I rang Demplan, and they saved me. I don't want to plug Demplan, but I have a few Demplan, but they literally saved me. They came in and they took over my practice for a month. They lent me money as well. Their PR team took over all press communication. I didn't even know they had a PR team. I was reading press releases that I said, and I don't even remember saying them. They were just doing my press releases for me. They did all my staff training. They got their practice Excel inspectors to put in protocols for me, and they negotiated a CQC to come back earlier than a month's time. They said, this guy's going to be ready in 2 weeks, come back in 2 weeks. And yeah, they held my hand through the next inspection, and we passed with flying colours. But that was a massive wake-up call. Massive wake-up call.
I bet. Yeah, that sounds bloody scary, man.
that was scary. That was scary. But yeah, you kind of learn who your friends are when things like that happen. And some of my staff were brilliant. And some of my staff were okay. Like, claiming overtime when we were seeing no patients, and they know I had no income for a month, but we're through it.
So just to rewind a little bit, how much did you, if you mind saying, how much did you get that practice for?
So I bought that practice for £867,000 pounds. So it's more than most first-time buyers would spend on a practice, and the corporates did want it. It was anything turning over £500,000 or of that size, the corporates did want it, and I've kind of stolen a couple of practices under the noses of corporates, purely because I probably look a bit innocent, and I am probably a bit too naive, but the corporates would probably put in an offer, and if I put in a similar offer but give the vendor all the money up front, and not tie them in, they would usually go for my offer, because the corporates will make that remaining 30% they're holding back difficult to attain. The practice would have to hit certain targets for them to get the full value, because you're no longer the principal. You're not controlling the marketing and the material spend. It's a bit unfair to be given targets that you're not fully in control of hitting.
It makes sense. So when did the second practice come along?
So I mean that was another breakthrough. My first practice did do well, purely because I was doing so much CPD. I could add orthodontics to the practice, which they weren't previously doing. Because I did the prosthodontics and the implants. All my specialists were kind of working separately, and they weren't really referring to each other, which is crazy. The prosthodontist was referring his implants out. We had a lady's special interest in perio he wasn't referring to, and just getting them speaking to each other eventually just made the practice more profitable. But in 2016, I wasn't really looking for a practice. I was sent a prospectus from the agents, because I was still registered with them, of a practice in Preston that was extremely profitable, much more profitable than my private practice. And it was a mixed practice. It was a big NHS contract and a big Denplan list, and the numbers didn't really add up while they were making, such a big profit. Eventually, when I visited the practice, I realized it wasn't one principal. It was a husband and wife team. But when I went there, practice was turning over 900,000, similar to the practice I bought at the time. But their profit was, declared profits 450,000 and adjusted net profit 500,000. And I walked in. Very nice couple, Jim and Joanne. I still talk to them today, but very basic practice. They had no computers, manual x-rays, no website, zero marketing, no Facebook, Instagram, did no cosmetic treatments, and no specialist treatments, and they were making much larger profit than my private practice, and it annoyed me. It really made me angry, actually. I bought it out of anger, in that I just said I didn't care. It was in Preston. It was 4 hours from Salisbury. I didn't care. I was in Preston. I just said, listen, I just have to buy this practice. You're just making me so angry at this very moment that I just need to buy it. And again, they rejected my offer, because now I'm technically an investor, and they took an offer of first-time buyers, another husband and wife team, and it wasn't for the fact that their finance fell through, that they came back to me. And even though my offer was actually higher than the previous couple's offer, they came back to me, and I lowered my offer a bit, but I bought the practice off them, and then I think that's when I really had to start learning how to run a business, because they had no manager, so I had to bring in a manager. Because it was my second practice, the banks were really making sure I did my due diligence. I was doing cash projections for the next 3 years, and how much it was going to cost me to modernize the practice, what impact it was going to have on the turnover. So that's when I really had to start learning the business of dentistry. I did well my first practice, but when you're working in a practice, you can afford to make mistakes. You can afford to make the wrong decision with equipment. You probably still use it because you spent a few thousand on it. But when it's your second practice, mistakes do punish you much more. And if you annoy your associates or don't get them the materials they want, and they walk, and you don't find an adequate replacement, that's going to have a massive impact on the business.
So was that associate led as well? Did the two principals stay on, or did they have to find some new people?
So one principal stayed on, Jim, and Joanne retired due to health reasons. Another associate, all the associates were quite elderly, and one associate retired because she was on a very, I think she was ready to retire, but she was on a very good wicket. She was taking 55%, and she had all the Denplan patients, and the principals were seeing the NHS patients for some reason. I think she kind of jumped before she felt she was going to get pushed, even though that wasn't my intention. Another associate, he wanted me to pay him £70,000 for him to stay. He felt he's contributed to the goodwill of the practice, and it's not fair that he doesn't get rewarded for it. So he said, "Give me 70,000 or I'll go," and I just said, "Fine." I was going to give him the Thea Paphitis line, "Why should I give you 70,000 for my children's inheritance?" But I thought I'd just be civil in case he changed his mind. So I just asked him, "No, I can't afford to give you 70,000. It's a bit unheard of." I found out he tried to get 70,000 off the principals as well when they sold, but I'm not sure what that was. I think that was just a bit of a jealousy thing, because they've done well out of the business, and I was a new young owner coming in, so there was a little bit of jealousy, I think, there.
So it sounds quite tricky, because it's obviously 4 hours away from the other practice, and then were you able to physically work in that practice, or were you having to just hire people? And what's that process like when you're trying to replace these stalwarts, these people who've been there for a long time, with new associates in an established practice? It must be quite tricky.
It was tricky, if I'm honest, and I think 2016 was the time. It wasn't as difficult to recruit associates, so the practice was in a really nice part of Preston in Penwortham, a really nice building, nice lush green garden outside. It was a nice practice, but it had a lot of potential, and I think the associates I interviewed could see the potential. So I was quite lucky, managed to recruit 2 or 3 people quite quickly, and even the people that said no to me a few months later actually emailed me and said, "I'm hearing good things about what's happening in Penwortham. They'd like to apply for the job." So hired a really good manager, and that was key, and a manager that not only the nurses would respect, but the dentists would respect. I find it's hard for managers to win respect from everybody, but she was very good. And we were just quite lucky because Preston has a dental school, and it's not too far from Manchester and Liverpool dental schools. There were associates around, and my difficulties when you buy a practice further than an hour from a dental school, you are going to make life more difficult for yourself.
That's an interesting point. So what type of things were you looking for when you're recruiting an associate? Because obviously it sounds like you had a few applicants. So, like, what kind of things are a green light, and what kind of things were a red flag to you when hiring?
To be honest, I didn't get many CVs, so we couldn't be that selective. But we didn't really need to be, because at that practice they weren't doing any kind of specialist treatments, and so they were just doing meat and potatoes dentistry. So we'd get a CV of someone that doesn't really do much CPD, but happy can do 8,000-9,000 UDAs a year. So we brought him in to focus on the NHS work. But then we got other associates who had just qualified, but because they they qualified from UCLan, which is actually more of a postgrad university. They have lots of postgrad courses. They're already thinking about doing postgrad courses in sedation and orthodontics and implants, and so it was a bonus hiring people who had aspirations to develop their skill set, because that was going to grow the private part of the business, which was the long-term aim. Even in 2016, even though I bought an NHS practice, I bought it in an affluent area because I wasn't sure what was going to happen with the contract, because they were piloting new NHS contracts. So I needed some sort of contingency.
Right, so that's practice number 2. So what happened then? So you got 2 practices fairly spread out across the country. What happened with number 3, and how did you start expanding from beyond then?
So I think practice 2 I bought really on a whim. I didn't have a long-term plan. I didn't need the income from the second practice. My first practice was covering all my expenses. So money is a nice problem to have. Money was collecting in the bank account of the second practice, and I knew nothing on investment, stocks and shares. I did have an interest in property, and I used to read a lot about how to buy property, and how there are professional landlords out there who don't work, or they just make money on renting and buying and selling property. And I used to read property forums in the evening, and which is interesting because I in the evening I can't read much about dentistry because I get dental fatigue. And when I was reading about these property investors, their main tactic to upscale was to recycle their deposit. So we'd always have to put a deposit down on a business, usually 20% or 10% if you're established. But the property investors, their goal was to get that deposit out of their investment as soon as possible. And I just thought, let's apply that tactic to dentistry. And I felt I was already privileged, because when I was buying the practices, yes, I had to put the deposit on the business, but actually the banks were giving me 100% of the loan for the property. And I was like, to be honest, I'm buying properties with no deposit here. And I think long term, it was my idea to have a property portfolio. I really like the sound of having properties giving me a monthly income, because as much as I love dentistry, and as much as I was glad I was in England, I could see myself retiring somewhere warm. Australia was still in the back of my mind, and so money was collecting, and I just said, I'm going to look at all practices around. I was going to stick to the northwest because you get more bang for your buck. I was just going to look at practices that could survive as an associate-run practice, so they have a large turnover already. I'll be honest with you. I said to you, Harry, what you're doing is more difficult than what I'm doing. I'm buying successful businesses. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. Setting up a squat, which I've now finally done, my first one and last, someone told me, if you have the ability to set up a business from scratch and take it to $1 million turnover, you can double the turnover of an existing practice with half the effort and half the skill set. So I think people like you are actually much more talented than me. I'm just living off someone else's success. They're already successful. I know if I add orthodontics, Invisalign, implants to this practice, I can make it slightly more successful. And that's what I did. And I was buying properties with no deposit, which is all going into a separate limited company. I was buying the businesses in another limited company because I knew eventually that company would be sold on with all the dental practices.
And you wanted to keep the property so that you'd still get the leases and stuff from whoever bought the.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So my dental business rents properties of my property business now, and I see how much deposit is required to buy an existing practice, and I crunch the numbers. If I think I can get my deposit back within 2 years, then I'd go for it, and I do the cash projections, show the bank. They say, yeah, your numbers look right. You know what you're doing. We're going to back you. And I've had good help from banks, particularly Lloyd's. Lloyd's are very knowledgeable about NHS dentistry, and they found things in accounts that I've missed, and accountants, business mentors, and once you're kind of making surplus income, you can afford professional advice, and I recommend people get that professional advice rather than taking a punt like I did a couple of times.
So I mean, you make it sound easy, Ahmed, but it's not, man. Like, running that many businesses must be, you must have an infrastructure. You must have created an infrastructure around you to solve a lot of issues before it gets to you, because having like 8 practices and then all of the problems of all those 8 businesses coming and being dealt by you is not really possible, is it? So, have you found that you've had to build that infrastructure around you with like really good practice managers, maybe business managers and things like this?
That would be the sensible thing to do. And yeah, I've not really put in that infrastructure. So I'm at my capacity, because apart from the practice managers, all I have is a part-time PA who's actually a retired manager. So and she was retiring and she was too good to let go. So I said to her, I'm going to need someone to help with the operations management of the practices. So she stayed on last year as my only person who's that middle manager layer. It is difficult, as in 9 practices, still relatively small. I mean, I know all the dentists because I interview all the dentists myself. I get the managers to obviously hire the support staff. So all the dentists have my number. A lot of the treatment coordinators and some of the lead nurses have my number. So I do get a lot of messages. And it is hard managing people, and I think it's just that humility I have instilled in me, maybe from my strict upbringing, maybe from Dublin Dental School, that I've learned how to manage difficult people. I've learned how to manage egos, yeah, because I'll be honest, my highest grossing dentists, some of them are difficult, some of them are demanding, some of them are a little bit arrogant, and my managers sometimes can't deal with them, and that's why they bring me in. And I just look at it pragmatically. I mean, I've read Alex Ferguson's autobiography, and he's managing a dressing room full of millionaires, people earning more than him sometimes, and it's just managing difficult personalities, massaging egos, telling them they're great, but you can't throw things at nurses still, even though you're great, and I think it's just because I've learnt the hard way not to react emotionally, and I've learnt how to kind of be pragmatic and don't react straight away. And if someone does something that's not great or a bit demanding, I kind of try not to respond that day. I try and sleep on it and look at it from a more clear perspective, and then give that person a couple of options, see if they can solve the problem they've created rather than me having to solve it. And usually that's worked, but I have been lucky. I bought 3 practices last year, so I went from 5 to 8, and then the Preston practice continued to do well, so we added a second location. So that had a second location as a squat, which is my 9th. Because it grew exponentially last year, really, that's when I've added my first middle manager, who just happens to be one of my managers retiring. And if the same thing happens again, one of my managers wants to retire, I'll keep them on and just have someone looking after the HR, someone looking after the bookkeeping. So I'm almost reverse engineering it. I've kind of gone full throttle without putting that infrastructure, and I'm now saying actually the money's good. My practices are probably artificially more profitable than they should be because I don't have that middle management which the other corporates will have. So I'm just gonna start adding people here and there.
So you've got a very clear identity or plan when it comes to, from experience, it sounds like, when it comes to purchasing a practice. You know, this thing about is it going to be crunching numbers? Is it going to be able to pay back the deposit within 2 years and then go from there? And obviously looking at the accounts and all this other stuff. Coming down to the actual dentistry, though, is there an armored way, like an armored model for the practices that you buy? Are you trying to turn them into an armored model, or are you trying to see them as individual businesses and just trying to maximize them rather than trying to create like one uniform culture across all of your practices?
No, so I mean, I'm a massive fan of general dentistry. I mean, we are. I mean, I always wanted to do medicine because I wanted to help people, and the most satisfying part of my job is, maybe to take someone out of pain, or just to help someone had a fear of dentists, and you can see their confidence has come back. But all my practices focus on general dentistry. I'm not looking for a high-end cosmetic practice. So they all do general dentistry, and they all have a repeat source of income, whether it's a big plan list or a big NHS list. I just need that mental security that should all my dentists walk out tomorrow, there's still money coming in the next day. And so I'm lucky with obviously my dad helped me with the first practice. I was able to buy a practice with a large turnover. So I do tend to go for practices with a large turnover with a repeat source of income from general dentistry. And then I start adding the iTero machines. Then I start adding the CBCT machines. Then I start the marketing. So they do follow a similar model. And yeah, because I don't need the incomes from these practice 2, 3, 4, 5, I can reinvest in these practices, and the associates see that I'm reinvesting. I still practice dentistry. I don't know how long I can keep that up for. I still work 2, 3, sometimes 4 days a week. But because I'm still working, I can still speak to my associates at a dentist-to-dentist level. So maybe I can't get them something they really want, but at least I can speak to them and say, actually, I'm using this, and I found, this is not as expensive and it works just as well. And, you gain your associates' respect A, if you can back them, and B, even if you can't, explain to them why, and they see I'm a wet-fingered dentist, and they know where I'm coming from, and I know where they're coming from.
I mean, that's really important, isn't it? So they don't just see you as a highfalutin business owner. You're still getting your hands dirty doing dentistry and dealing with patients.
Yeah, I mean that exactly. I mean that wasn't necessarily deliberate, but I'm still practicing dentistry. I don't drive an expensive car. My car's second-hand BMW because I do so much mileage up and down the country. I don't want to ruin a new car, but I think that does help. I mean, I've because my associates understand me that and they've kind of bought into what I'm trying to do. We have disagreements, but we get over them pretty quickly. Whereas if it was led to a regional manager to deal with something, I think problems could have escalated.
So with this squat practice, obviously it sounds like it was, so you've got an established brand in that Preston area, and then you're making a squat practice has it still got the same name, but it's like practice number 2 of that?
No, we because I bought an existing practice, Penwortham Dental Practice, because it was an established in the community and a trusted name. I don't change names of practices that have links to the community, which work well with Google SEO. But we grew from 3 to 5 surgeries, and then we had that post-COVID boom, and we realized we needed to add a couple of more surgeries. And I just decided that I should think about rebranding some of the practices so they have a similar name. Ones that have their name associated with the ex-principal, we're slowly going to change them as the principals retire. So we've started a new brand called Tooth Talk. So that squat was the first Tooth Talk practice. I didn't actually like the name Tooth Talk, but I was talking to Shaz from Digimax, and he liked it. And because our USP was we're going to do free, video consults with patients. We're happy to talk, trying to talk them out of going to Turkey to get 20 zirconia crowns. So we're happy talking. So we said, yeah, let's just call it Tooth Talk. And so I'm slowly reverse engineering. I'm slowly starting to put a brand together. So if a practice either has the brand name or they're part of the group, but they keep their existing name.
And what's been challenging about the squat for you then? What's been the most challenging parts of it?
To be honest, I was quite fortunate because the original practice was profitable. I decided I'm going to do the squat with no bank loan because I knew it wasn't going to make a return in the first 6 months. I'm sure you'll tell me, and other people on Facebook will tell me, that it's possible to make a profit within 6 months of opening a squat. It might be, but it'd be extremely difficult. But I thought because it may not be profitable in the first year or two, I'm going to self-fund it. And yeah, it's just I decided not to get a bank loan. I thought I'll tackle this head on. I'll put my cash behind it. I put my cash behind the associates and say, I believe in you. Here's my cash. Go and conquer Rome. And to be honest, they are doing well. We've had a bit of a dip, obviously, in December and January, probably because of Christmas and cost of living crisis. But yeah, psychologically it's difficult writing out checks, buying new equipment, because we kitted it out from scratch. When the place is not making an income, and if I didn't have 8 other practices behind me, I'd be having a lot of sleepless nights. But because I've got those practices behind me, that I'm a bit more bullish, and I'm taking a bit more chance these days, which I wouldn't have done a few years ago.
Because like for my philosophy with squats is very much if you've got like a powerhouse clinician who's able to gross high revenues themselves, and then they go and open a squat, that's why it would be profitable in the first 6 months. So it's the profile of work you're doing, but also the profile of clinician that's involved. That makes a massive difference. So have you got associates that are like heavy hitters, or is it one of those where?
Yeah, no, I do, and I have some heavy hitter associates, and I know Corey Ferran talks about types of associate, bees, butterflies, and leeches. Google that podcast, is very good. But there are some heavy hitter associates, and you're thinking, well, they're doing so well, they could set up their own place. And I do like to keep an open dialogue with my associates and say, listen, if you want to open up your own practice, I don't mind. Just don't do it next door, and I'll help you. I mean, I'll go through the numbers with you if you're going to buy somewhere, or if you're going to do a squat, I can give you advice and just learn from my mistakes. And I think my associates do appreciate that honesty and that open dialogue. And I do have heavy hitter associates, and they are kind of driving the squat forwards. But I'll always have that anxiety that I'll wake up in the morning with an email saying I've decided to set up my own place, and so that's the anxiety. But I think by the time that happens, hopefully the brand is strong enough, and we now have our own full-time marketing assistant in that practice, and we feel now we've got enough systems in place that if someone make the as Richard Branson says, train people so much that they can set up on their own, but train them so much and treat them so well that they don't want to leave. And that's kind of the philosophy we have now.
Have you ever thought of trying to lock them in and give them a percentage or some sort of incentivization?
That has been spoken about, and I've been very honest with associates in that if they buy in, the maximum I could sell was probably 49%, because when the day comes, someone wants to buy me out, the likelihood is they want to buy all my practices rather than just a couple of them. And so I would have to trigger the sale of the practice, so I'd need the majority of the voting rights. And I think some associates might decide to buy in if they're comfortable. There'll be 49% shareholders, which I know Dental Beauty and other corporates have that model. Again, back to reverse engineering, that might be something that we go back and decide to do.
And what's your kind of long-term plans now? We're getting towards the end now. It's been a long. Thank you so much for your time. What's your long-term plan now, Ahmed? Like, where do you see the next 5-10 years going for you and your business and everything?
Basically, practice ownership is stressful. I'm not gonna lie, and it's not for everyone. And the only thing that makes it bearable for me is that I've got my exit strategy ready today. The only thing that gives me confidence to keep growing is that if I do find myself flying too close to the sun, I can just say, actually, I'm ready to sell. All the paperwork is in a Dropbox file. I'm just going to email it to an agent and say, who's interested. So long term, I do want to keep growing. I mean, I bought 3 last year and set up a squat. I'm not going to do that again. I don't want to have a massive kind of head office with all the expense that goes. So I feel confident I can still grow 1 a year. But yeah, there will come a time where if I think it's getting too much or I stop enjoying it, then I would consider selling the businesses, but keeping hold of the properties, and that rental income will be my kind of pension as such.
I mean, it's a clever business model, to be fair. You've been very shrewd with the way you've set it all up. What I would also say is there's something that you identified there. A lot of people look at high-end private dentistry as the only way. Like, I interact with a lot of dentists now when they're looking to set up squat practices, but there is a big market out there for more affordable general dentistry, even in the private setting. So it's something that I don't know if it's the egos or what work people like to do, but it is a good and viable business.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't look that great on Instagram, doing a nice occlusal amalgam, but that's what patients want. I mean, when they want a dentist, and I've done a lot of big cosmetic cases on patients I'd least expect it from, and I just looked after their general kind of dentistry, and they reached a point where they've gotten to know me, they kind of trust me, and they are asking me my opinions about changing all their crowns to more aesthetic ones, and they are the people I enjoy treating the most. We've built that trust, we've got that rapport. They're not looking for crazy Hollywood looks. They're baby boomers. They've paid off their mortgage. They've got spare capital, and they've got low expectations after decades of NHS dentistry, and they're the people that will still have money during recessions as well. So, yeah, there's a lot to be said about non-Instagram dentistry. It is what will keep us busy during recessions.
And you've just said the recession thing. We might as well talk about that a little bit. How do you see that going over the next couple of years?
I think it will definitely have an effect, and I think it probably has a little bit of an effect of my squat, but my squat's only been there for 6 months. Too early to tell. But yeah, because there's still a lack of dentists at the moment, and the NHS dentistry is still in decline. No one is accepting new patients. We are going to be kept busy, and it might be kept busy with general dentistry, and there's signs that we won't go into a recession this year from the Bank of England forecast. So we could be leaving it quite soon if inflation starts to descend. And so focus on your core dentistry, your core values, and the good times will return.
Awesome. And is there any advice you'd give to young dentists at the minute?
I think, yeah, just look for a supportive environment. I know most new dentists that are applying for jobs want some sort of mentorship. It is hard to provide one-to-one mentorship, but look for a supportive practice. Have an open dialogue with the principal, saying, I wouldn't mind doing this type of treatment in the future. I'm happy to contribute to the marketing spend if you're going to get me lots of Invisalign cases. And yeah, just tell the principal your expectations, and the principal tell the associate your expectations as well. And yeah, if you're thinking of buying a practice, just obviously reach out to people who have done it and bought a t-shirt. Reach out to me. I'm sure Harry put my email address on the show notes. Or reach out to more experienced people, because we've fought the same battle that you're about to fight.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time, Ahmed. It's been quite a varied conversation, and you've had quite an interesting clinical and life story. So, yeah, that's awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you for inviting me. Anytime.
Thanks for listening. Please leave a positive review and share the podcast to your circle. If you'd like to touch base with Dr. Harry Gill, or inquire about mentoring, email the Dental Innovator Podcast at gmail.com.